The day I had heart surgery, my boyfriend of 5 years ran away with my fake sister. Once this happened, the surgery could only be halted, under anesthesia. I was wheeled out of the operating room. I accidentally overheard the housekeeper talking on the phone at home. "Don't worry, son, you took Sophia away. Without a heart, she can't undergo surgery. She's just a foster daughter. It doesn't matter even if something happens to her. This way, the future inheritance will belong to you and Sophia." My boyfriend of 5 years, he's actually not a rich second generation, but the son of our housekeeper. He deceived me for 5 whole years. The aim was to get close to my sister, to inherit our family's wealth. Rumors say the eldest daughter of the Thompson family has congenital heart disease. She won't live past 25, but he doesn't know. My sister is actually adopted. The one who can inherit the billion-dollar Thompson group in the future is only me. I woke up. The effects of the anesthesia had just worn off. I saw my mom sitting by the bed. Her eyes were red. She saw that I was awake. She started crying again out of self-blame. She said, "It's all my fault. I didn't expect Sophia to abandon you. If I had known, I wouldn't have." The nurse, Mrs. Anderson, was still standing nearby. I quickly interjected and said to my mom, "Don't worry, the surgery can be postponed." Only then did my mom nod. She said, "Everything is arranged. The surgery can be rescheduled for tomorrow." Mrs. Anderson said in surprise, "The second young lady doesn't need to donate her heart to the eldest young lady. They found a new heart so quickly." My mom said unhappily, "Don't talk nonsense. Sophia and Emily are both our children. How could we possibly let Sophia donate her heart to Emily?" Mrs. Anderson initially wanted the sister to donate some blood. She didn't expect that she wouldn't even be willing to do this small thing for her sister, and did such an unwise thing. I noticed an unexpected panic on Mrs. Anderson's face, so I seized the opportunity to speak. "Mom, wait until I recover. I don't want to acknowledge this sister anymore. My mom listens to me. Hurry and comfort me." "Okay, wait until you recover. The Thompson family only recognizes you as their daughter." I smiled slightly. I noticed Mrs. Anderson hurriedly leaving the ward with her phone. The next day, the surgery went very smoothly. The doctor told me, "This is the last time I need to undergo heart bypass surgery. For the next 50 years, I won't have to go under the knife again." After the anesthesia wore off, I woke up. I found that there were a few more people around me. It turned out that my unreliable sister and my always lying ex-boyfriend had come back. Sophia said to me, "Elder sister, I was wrong. I shouldn't have hidden just because I was afraid of the injection. I didn't give you blood." She hasn't finished speaking. She started to cry. It's heartbreaking to see her cry, because I'm Rh negative blood type. She has the same blood type, so every time before my surgery, I need her to donate 200 cc of blood for backup. Actually, this amount of blood doesn't affect her health, but she always finds excuses not to give it to me. This time she even made up an outrageous reason. She said I wanted her to give me her heart. After she said that, she looked at Daniel, hoping for his concern. But Daniel didn't even look at her. I know she's always thinking about me, her boyfriend. The first time I brought Daniel home, after introducing him as the CEO of Thompson Group, her eyes immediately lit up. She kept calling him brother-in-law. During dinner, she kept serving him food, wearing revealing clothes and leaning against him. It's like she was afraid others wouldn't see her intentions. I didn't expect Daniel would really do something to hurt me. Daniel held my hand. He said with a worried expression, "Emily, as long as you're okay, these are all misunderstandings. Once you're feeling better, I will explain it to you properly." I listened to these insincere words. Without exposing it right there, I just nodded. I held his hand. I responded, "I knew you wouldn't leave me." I saw jealousy and resentment in Sophia's eyes. I felt very satisfied inside. I just want her to understand the boyfriend in her eyes. Actually, with just a slight hint from me, he would immediately come to my side. Whatever she wants, she has to wait until I've had my fill before I let her go. While I was hospitalized, Daniel stayed by my side, busily taking care of me. He fulfilled the responsibilities of a boyfriend. I really enjoyed everything he did for me. He provided me with emotional support. He occasionally spends money to buy me bags. That's the only thing I have to do. Just pretend to believe him. Believe what he says. Running into my sister while on a business trip was just a coincidence. It wasn't an elopement. It was when I asked him to buy me a bag for the 3rd time. I accidentally overheard Daniel talking on the phone in the bathroom. Why is he buying another bag? A single bag costs hundreds of thousands. I've spent all the money I've saved over the years," Mrs. Anderson said on the phone. "Mom, it's just hundreds of thousands. Isn't there still a house in our hometown? Selling it would be just enough. If it's not enough, you can borrow a little more. It's fine. If you don't invest, you won't get returns. I can't expose my identity as a rich second generation. Once Emily is discharged from the hospital, I will propose to her at that time. Don't mention just these hundreds of thousands. Millions or tens of millions are not a problem." Upon hearing these words, I couldn't help but sneer inwardly. Actually, I knew long ago that he wasn't really a rich second generation, but it's because I love him. I don't care about his identity at all. No matter if he is rich or poor, I would still be willing to marry him. I thought his identity was fake. At least his feelings for me are real, but I didn't expect. It turns out everything was a lie. His identity is fake, and so are his feelings. Since that's the case, I can take it or leave it. My love has been given away, and I can take it back at any time. When Daniel came out of the bathroom, I was sitting on the hospital bed, eating the apple he had peeled for me. I asked him in a spoiled tone, "Is that bag particularly hard to get? But I really want it." He walked over, shaking his head and saying, "Emily, what do you want? Even if it's a star from the sky, I will find a way to pick it for you." I took a bite of the apple, trying hard to hide my happiness. Right now, I don't care about any stars. I just want that person who betrayed me to taste some bitterness. Daniel just finished speaking. Sophia walked in wearing a short skirt and high heels. She might have overheard our conversation outside. Her face clearly showed a look of jealousy, but as soon as she saw me, she immediately smiled and asked, "Hey, sister, when can you be discharged from the hospital? Mom and Dad said they miss you. They are looking forward to you coming home soon." I find it a bit funny inside. Mom and Dad have long ignored her, ever since she eloped with Daniel. At home, she is like air. She probably wants me to forgive her first. Then she hopes Mom and Dad will forgive her too. But that's impossible. What she gets from me will only be my revenge. I looked at Daniel next to me, who was peeling grapes for me. He smiled and said, "For the discharge, let's listen to the doctor, but I will discuss it with Mom and Dad. Wait for me to be discharged. Then we will announce our engagement." Engaged to the CEO of Thompson Group. I deliberately emphasized my tone, just saying the words CEO of Thompson Group. As soon as I finished speaking, joy immediately shone in Daniel's eyes. I looked at him and smiled gently. Very soon, I noticed Sophia's expression changed repeatedly. First it was dark, then it turned pale. Finally, it turned red. Her expressions were truly rich. I even took out the 2 bags Daniel bought for me, deliberately showing off in front of her. I've been feeling down during these days in the hospital. Daniel saw me like this. He insisted on buying me a bag. "You think it's pretty?" Sophia really couldn't sit still. She couldn't even maintain a forced smile. She casually found an excuse and left with a sullen expression. After she left, Daniel asked me in surprise and joy, "Emily, is the engagement you just mentioned true?" I nodded firmly. Daniel smiled widely. He was so happy he jumped. He walked around the ward several times. After running, he came over, hugged me tightly, and said, "Emily, I will definitely treat you well in the future." He gently kissed my forehead. Then he picked up his phone and left quickly. He said he had work to handle. He probably went to share the good news with Mrs. Anderson, but he didn't know. As soon as he left, I disdainfully wiped my forehead where he had kissed. Then I took out my phone and sent a text. "Are you back in the country?" The other side replied immediately, "No." "Are you engaged?" He replied immediately again. "No." However, the second Noah's quickly retracted. Then the first Noah's also canceled. After that, an international call came in. "Who do you want to get engaged to?" The other person asked in a deep and magnetic voice. "You." I learned to speak concisely from him. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the phone. Then he asked, "Are you serious?" "Yes." The day I was discharged from the hospital, Sophia was hospitalized due to heart discomfort for a whole morning. Daniel appeared restless. Actually, I wasn't surprised by Sophia's hospitalization. She has congenital heart disease since childhood. She was also an abandoned baby. My parents thought she resembled me. Out of affection, they brought her home. She probably wouldn't have lived past 1 year, but the Thompson family is wealthy and powerful. They provided her with the best medical conditions. They helped her survive until the age of 3. For the past decade or so, she has to take the most expensive medicines every day. My parents, to avoid scaring her, always secretly mixed the medicine powder into her regular food. This time I got sick. I estimate it's because of the 2 days I eloped with Daniel. I didn't take my medicine and bird's nest on time every day. I understand in my heart, but I didn't point it out. I put down the newspaper and asked, "Are you worried about Sophia? Should we go to the hospital to see her together? Daniel is worried that I might discover something." I quickly shook my head and said, "No need. You just got discharged. It might not be good to go back to the hospital. Let's wait a couple of days before going." I nodded and didn't say anything more. Not long after, Daniel made an excuse that he was busy with work at the company. He prepared to leave. I reminded him, "The dinner tonight is very important. Don't forget to come back early," he promised. Then he walked out the door. I then picked up the newspaper and continued reading. On the front page of the newspaper, the news about the Thompson Group CEO returning to the country was very prominent. After my parents came back, I suggested we visit Sophia in the hospital together. They saw me take the initiative, so they agreed. When we reached the door of the ward, I heard Daniel talking inside. I quickly said to my parents, "You go talk to the doctor about Sophia's condition. I'll go in first." After they left, I stood quietly outside the door. "You can't leave. I'm not allowing you to get engaged today," Sophia shouted excitedly. Daniel advised, "Sophia, don't do this. Even if I become your brother-in-law, we are still a family. Isn't that right? Brother-in-law and husband. Actually, it's just one character different." I almost couldn't help but laugh. It's funny how just one character can completely change the meaning. Sophia insisted, "I don't care. You clearly promised to marry me before. Now you're backing out. If you dare to get engaged to her today, I'll expose everything between us." Daniel's tone became impatient. He lost his patience. "Go ahead and say it. I'll just say you were the one who seduced me, and then you falsely accuse me instead. We'll see whether your sister believes you or me more." "You!" Sophia started to cry softly. Daniel comforted her in a gentle tone. "Don't cry anymore. Even though I'm going to get engaged to your sister, but the one I've always loved is you." I stood outside the door for a long time. When my parents came back, they saw me still there. They asked me, "Emily, why haven't you gone inside?" I put down the phone I had been holding. I said, "Oh, I just received a call." After pushing the door open, both of our emotions calmed down a lot. Sophia's eyes were still red. It was obvious she had just cried. My parents thought she was worried about her health. They hurried to comfort her. Daniel was nervously glancing at me, afraid that I might become suspicious. I had already thought of a reason for him. I casually asked, "Just finished up?" He let out a sigh of relief. He nodded and said, "Yeah, just finished up. Come over and take a look." I nodded. I didn't say more. Before leaving, I walked up to Sophia. I said regretfully, "It's a pity you can't see the engagement ceremony between me and your brother-in-law today." Sophia had just been calmed down by my parents. Upon hearing this, she couldn't help but tear up. She didn't dare to cry in front of me. She could only force herself to nod. We returned to Thompson Estate. The venue was almost set up. In an hour, we would welcome the guests. I went upstairs with my parents to change clothes. Daniel originally planned to go with us, but I stopped him. I said, "You should just wait here. Although today is the engagement day, if the guests see you coming down from upstairs, it might not be very appropriate." Daniel didn't doubt my words. After nodding in agreement, he just waited in place. 1 hour later, guests from various families arrived one after another. My parents had already changed into their clothes. They stood at the entrance to welcome the guests. I was already dressed up. I made a special effort to dress very formally today. I wore a gradient starry blue long dress. My skin was fair and smooth. It perfectly showcased my tall and slender figure. I stared at myself in the mirror. The makeup was perfect. My features were exquisite. My eyes revealed an innate nobility and confidence. That's right. This is the eldest daughter of the Thompson family. Emily. How could she cry and complain about fate just because a man doesn't love her? She wouldn't do that. Suddenly, my phone rang. I received a text message. As usual, the content couldn't be any shorter. It's only 2 words. "I'm here." I smiled gently, stand up, walk down slowly. Just reached the stairway. The host loudly announced the main character's entrance. The spotlight shone on me. Immediately, there were waves of admiration from the audience. Wow, so beautiful. No wonder she comes from a prestigious family. Her aura is indeed unique. Under everyone's gaze, I slowly walked down the curving stairs. At the stairway, Daniel was wearing a black suit. He reached out his hand to me. He looked fairly neat, but he appeared a bit tired from a busy day. On the other side, a man half a head taller than him had a cold expression on his face. He also reached out his hand to me. He was wearing a dark suit. The tie was neatly arranged. Calm and composed, the whole person exudes a noble yet casual aura. Daniel was initially surprised. Then his eyes revealed unease. He scrutinized the man standing next to him, the man whose presence clearly overshadowed him. Everyone, look quickly. The man standing over there seems to be the CEO of Thompson Group, the eldest son of the Thompson family. That's him. He was even in the newspaper a few days ago. Oh my, such a powerful alliance. Only the CEO of Thompson Group is worthy of the eldest daughter of the Thompson family. Daniel heard a few words from the crowd. He immediately straightened his back. A determined look appeared on his face. The atmosphere on site suddenly became tense. Everyone held their breath, waiting to see this spectacle. No one expected. At my engagement banquet, there would actually be 2 male leads. I stepped forward. I extended my hand. Daniel was momentarily stunned because I held Alexander's hand without hesitation. A wave of cheers erupted on the scene. I gently linked my arm with Alexander's. I smiled and said with my head tilted, "Sorry to keep you waiting, fiancé." Alexander smiled down at me. The corners of his mouth lifted slightly. He revealed a meaningful smile. Then he continued to walk forward with me. Daniel's smile and outstretched hand suddenly froze. He couldn't believe what was happening in front of him. Seeing that I was about to leave, he hurried over, trying to grab my arm. Alexander reacted quickly, immediately blocked him. "What do you want to do?" Alexander's smile faded away. His tone became serious, with a hint of warning. She looked down at him. Her eyes were filled with disdain, as if looking at something useless. Daniel still hadn't snapped out of his imagination. His speech was a bit disordered. "Emily, how could this happen you? Clearly, it's me. I'll just ask him directly. What are you?" Daniel didn't say anything further. He seemed a bit hesitant. I continued with the introduction. "This is the CEO of Thompson Group, the eldest son of the Thompson family. He is also the only heir." He looked very embarrassed, but he couldn't say a word. I went on to say, "You think the Thompson family won't appear in public, and your lies will never be exposed. The headquarters of Thompson Group is located abroad, and I just happen to grow up abroad because I have congenital heart disease. I have been receiving treatment abroad since I was little. Sophia was lucky. She got better when she was 3 and was sent back to the country, so she has never met Alexander, and my condition only stabilized when I was 20. I returned to the country, and Alexander and I grew up as good friends." After I finished saying this, I planned to take Alexander away. Daniel stopped me once again. "Go ahead. Emily, I did lie to you. I'm not the CEO of Thompson Group, but my feelings for you are real. Our 5-year relationship. Are you really going to give up on me just because of someone who came later?" I was just about to speak when a low and impatient voice interrupted from the side. "I met her when she was 3 years old. I even held her when she was a child. Our friendship spans over a decade, if we're talking about who came first. You're the one who came later." The usually quiet person suddenly spoke for quite a while. I almost laughed out loud. In the end, she shot me a glare and asked, "What are you laughing at? Haven't I held you before?" I thought to myself, after all, he is 5 years older than me, so what if he held you? I quickly composed my expression, but Daniel seized the opportunity to say, "Look, you don't even dare to smile in front of him. He doesn't care about you at all. Emily, I really love you. Give me another chance. I have prepared a surprise for you." Take a look quickly at his command. The curtain in the attic slowly descends. The lights in the hall also went out completely. Then, he started playing the video he prepared for me, unexpectedly. A woman's soft hum came from the beginning of the video. What was projected was not an emotional documentary, but rather 2 people entangled with each other and making some sounds. The visuals were quite explicit. The main characters in the video were that man who said he would give me a surprise, and my reckless sister. This surprise is really explosive. The scene suddenly became chaotic. Alexander quickly stood in front of me, covering my ears with his hands. He said seriously, "Don't look. It's not suitable for you." I sighed helplessly. I gently pushed his hand away. I reminded him, "Big brother, I'm already 25 years old." He took a step forward. His tall figure instantly loomed over me. The intense sense of pressure made me hesitate to act rashly. After a long while, he said in a deep voice, "What's wrong with being 25? I proposed to you when I was 25. Didn't you use that reason to reject me?" His words carried evident bitterness. I even felt a hint of grievance. I was truly speechless inside. I was only 20 years old back then. I hadn't even held a man's hand. I had always maintained a somewhat distant relationship with him. Then he suddenly did this. Proposed to me. Anyone would want to run away. Right. I still ran away. I ran back to my home country to make him completely give up. I even pretended to have a new boyfriend on purpose until Daniel hurriedly turned off the video. Only then did he finally let go of me. Daniel still wanted to step forward to explain to me, but he was kicked away in disgust. In the end, my parents, who couldn't bear to watch, stepped in. They gave him a stern lecture and had the security drag him out. After this farce of an engagement ended, Alexander took me out of the hall before leaving. The outside area was not as lively as the hall. It was very quiet around. Only a few warm yellow lights were on. What do you want to do? I hadn't seen him for 5 years. Suddenly, it was just the two of us alone together. It would be a lie to say it wasn't awkward at all. Yet he naturally took my hand. He pulled out a ring from somewhere and calmly put it on my finger. He murmured to himself, "Now you can't back out." After saying that, he lowered his head and gently kissed my hand. He tightly held my hand. He wouldn't let go, as if I might run away at any moment. I felt completely uncomfortable because of him. It felt like my hair was standing on end. Although it was a bit uncomfortable, it was completely different from how I felt when Daniel kissed my forehead. At that time, I felt disgusted from the bottom of my heart. Now, besides feeling a bit at a loss, there's also a genuine joy from within. Speaking of which, I dated Daniel for 5 years, but our intimacy only ever reached holding hands. Every time he wanted to get closer, I instinctively resisted. I never understood why that was. Looking back now, maybe it's because I didn't really like him that much. "All right, you should head back early." I was the last to speak. He softly responded, but he still didn't let go of my hand until my parents came out. Seeing us standing here, they walked over to us. I took the opportunity to slip away. He let go of me, skillfully greeted my parents. "Hello, uncle and aunt." Little Chen. I was puzzled why Emily suddenly said she wanted to get engaged. "So it was you two grew up together. Emily is marrying you. We all feel at ease. Daniel is unreliable, always lying. He even impersonated you. Emily used to protect him a lot. Let us all close one eye and keep quiet." I was puzzled back then. How could Emily like someone like that? Now I understand. It turns out it was all because he borrowed your name. These words made me blush instantly. I quickly pulled my mom back to leave. "Mom, stop saying nonsense. Let's go home quickly." My mom didn't forget to remind me. "Little Chen, be careful on your way back. Come over more often in the future. The Thompson estate is your home. Back home. The guests have all left." I saw Mrs. Anderson standing in the corner with a worried expression. I waved to her. Mrs. Anderson saw me calling her. She quickly came over with a smile. I asked her, "How long have you been at the Thompson house?" She replied, "Since the year you returned to the country. I've been here since then. It's been a full 5 years now." I nodded and said, "The Thompson family will give you 6 months' salary as compensation. Starting today, you no longer need to work at the Thompson estate." Mrs. Anderson was immediately stunned. Then she burst into tears. "Oh, Miss Thompson, what have I done wrong? I have worked so hard for the Thompson family all these years. Please don't make me leave." Seeing this, my parents also advised me. Yes, Mrs. Anderson has been devoted to the Thompson family for so many years. Why is it suddenly necessary? I let out a cold laugh. "Do you know whose son Daniel is? He is Mrs. Anderson's son. Her initial purpose for coming to our house was not sincere. Where is the loyalty in that?" Mrs. Anderson realized the situation was exposed. She cried and knelt down to beg me. She asked me to give her another chance. She said if she lost this job, she would never find such a good one again. I looked at her coldly. I didn't say anything. Back then, she confidently said on the phone that it wouldn't matter even if I died. Sophia would inherit all of the Thompson family's wealth. She was so proud and happy at that time. Now, she cries just as miserably. But all of this is of her own making. I called security to pack up Mrs. Anderson's things and throw them out of the Thompson estate. No matter how she cried outside the doors of Thompson estate would never open for her again. I heard from my parents that after Daniel was dumped by me, he went back to look for Sophia. His act of pretending to be a rich second generation was exposed. Sophia is no longer enthusiastic about him, but on the day she was discharged from the hospital, Daniel still accompanied her back to Thompson estate. I was in the yard watering the flowers with a hose. I saw them walking over from a distance. I joked and asked, "How should I address you now, brother-in-law?" Sophia shot Daniel a glare. she said dismissively. Big sister, don't say that nonsense. I have nothing to do with him. Daniel felt angry inside, but he didn't dare to express it. He could only endure it. He silently followed behind Sophia, helping her carry things. But Sophia wouldn't even let him enter the Thompson family's gate. She only allowed him to drop off the things and leave. As Daniel passed by me, he wanted to come over and talk to me again. He happened to run into Alexander, who was coming to find me. Emily. Alexander walked over. His tone was a bit harsh. He suddenly picked me up in his arms. He reminded me as we walked in, don't talk to strangers casually. Daniel didn't even get an extra glance. As soon as I entered the door, I insisted that he put me down. Sophia saw that Alexander had arrived. Her eyes lit up. She sweetly called him brother-in-law. She looked at him with the same gaze she used to give Daniel, but my parents shot me a glance. I immediately became much more proper. Little Chen is here. My parents invited Alexander to sit down. They were much more enthusiastic than when I brought Daniel home. They kept kindly calling him Little Chen. I originally thought Alexander didn't talk much. Maybe he wasn't used to this kind of occasion, but I didn't expect him to have such a lively conversation with my parents. Moreover, the topics they discussed were basically all about me. He curiously asked me how the past 5 years have been. I didn't even have a chance to interject. Sophia couldn't get a word in either. She sat to the side. Her expression wasn't good. She looked like an outsider. In the end, she could only leave in anger. After Alexander left, I returned to my room. It wasn't long before the downstairs became lively again. It turned out Mrs. Anderson had returned. Sophia invited her back. My mom disagreed, but Sophia insisted on keeping Mrs. Anderson. I felt a bit confused. Since Sophia barely pays attention to Daniel, why is she helping Mrs. Anderson secure this job? I went down the stairs. My mom saw me. She hurried over to ask me what I thought. I told my mom, "Mom, now everyone knows about my affair with Daniel. My reputation is already ruined. I can only marry him now. I want my future mother-in-law to stay home and take care of me. Is that not okay?" Sophia shouted angrily. My mom looked at me awkwardly. I felt she had a point. After all, she will be my mother-in-law in the future. There's no problem staying behind. Mrs. Anderson hasn't done anything excessive before. I just agreed. That night, Mrs. Anderson moved in. Because Mrs. Anderson was there, Daniel started coming to my house more often. We inevitably ran into each other at home. I always tried to avoid him on purpose, but he always wanted to talk to me. I really admire him. After being humiliated by me like that, he could still smile at me. I originally thought he had spent all his money on me, even selling his family's house to buy me a bag. But to my surprise, he is still very generous to Sophia. Sophia often comes back with a new bag, although not as expensive as the ones he gave me. Each bag is still worth around 100,000. Sophia's attitude towards Daniel is still very poor. They don't act like a couple. Instead, it seems more like Daniel is following Sophia around. Sophia rarely looks at him directly. It's completely different from how she used to flatter him. As for Alexander, she often shows a desire to please. Every time Alexander comes to see me, she always walks around in sexy nightgowns in front of us and looks for opportunities to lean against him. Once, Alexander avoided her. She accidentally fell down. Because of this, Alexander has asked me several times to move out. I refused every time. Why should I move out? If anyone should move, it should be them. I was eating an apple and speaking slowly. After Alexander finished speaking, he stood up and prepared to leave. I quickly grabbed him. "Don't go." Then I asked him about the video from the engagement banquet. "Was it you who did it?" Alexander answered without hesitation. "Yes." I squinted my eyes and said, "That video caused Thompson's stock to drop significantly. What are you going to do to compensate?" He crossed his arms. He answered calmly, "Use all the assets of Thompson Group for compensation." Is that enough? I couldn't help but laugh, holding his hand. He patiently persuaded for quite a while. Only then did he slowly calm down. After sending off Alexander, I returned home. I happened to see Mrs. Anderson quietly coming out of my room. I had some doubts, because I never allow others to clean my room. What did she go in for? Suddenly, I thought of something. I quickly walked into the room. I pulled open the drawer. I found that the medicine I had placed inside had indeed been disturbed. Although I no longer need surgery, I still have to take medicine on time every day. Recently, I've been feeling a bit uncomfortable with my heart. I immediately contacted the family doctor. Half an hour later, Dr. Wilson arrived at my house. I called everyone to the living room. I briefly explained the situation. Dr. Wilson examined for a while. Then he said, "The medicine was indeed switched, but it's not poison. It's just some vitamin pills." Mrs. Anderson was trembling in fear on the side. She immediately knelt down and cried, "This has nothing to do with me. It was all the second miss who instructed me to do it. I don't know anything." When Sophia heard this, she got so angry that she rushed over to hit her. She said, "What are you talking about? You did something disgraceful yourself, and you want to blame it on me." The two of them started fighting. My parents quickly pulled Sophia away. Daniel rushed over in a hurry. He said it was all a misunderstanding. But what exactly happened? Actually, everyone was clear about it. I didn't say anything more. I left it to my parents to handle. I went with Dr. Wilson to the hospital for a heart checkup. As soon as I arrived at the hospital, Alexander immediately rushed over. This was the first time I saw him so flustered. He carefully examined my whole body. Then he nervously asked, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" I looked at him. I found his expression a bit amusing. He just shook his head, but he held me tightly, repeatedly saying, "As long as you're okay, as long as you're okay." I was taken aback for a moment. I didn't expect him to care about me so much. After all the tests were done, the doctor told me it was fortunate that it was discovered early. There was no danger to life. However, I need to take medication on time from now on. Just come back to the hospital for regular checkups a few times and it'll be fine. On the way home, Alexander kept holding my hand tightly. He wouldn't let go. I wanted to pull my hand back, but he held on even tighter. I couldn't help but shout in pain. He quickly let go of my hand. He said, "I'm sorry." I shook my head and said it was fine, smilingly teasing. I really didn't expect President Chen to also have nervous moments. He cleared his throat. "Turn your head away." After a long while, he suddenly said, "I won't let them go. I'm a bit confused." I didn't expect Sophia to actually be so ruthless as to want my life. This time, I have to teach her a good lesson. As the car drove into Thompson Estate, I saw several police cars parked in the yard. I had just gotten out of the car. When I saw the police escorting Sophia and Mrs. Anderson out, when Daniel saw me come back, he hurried over to plead for her. My mom was just confused for a moment. "Please don't blame her." I ignored him, but he kept following me, saying, "Sophia is your biological sister. How could you send her to prison for the sake of inheritance?" I stopped in my tracks and sneered. "I'm fighting for inheritance. The Thompson family's property originally belongs to me. What do I have to fight for?" This statement might have a huge impact on Daniel. He ultimately said nothing more. I walked into the house. I saw my parents sitting in the living room. Their faces were filled with worry. They noticed I was back. My dad said slowly, "Tomorrow we will publicly announce Sophia's status as our adopted daughter. From now on, the Thompson family will only recognize you as our daughter." After saying that, he scratched his head, then turned and walked upstairs. He also sighed. Some people, after all, can never be truly close. My mom walked over. She gently patted my shoulder to comfort me, seeing that things were mostly settled. Alexander finally left with peace of mind. Before leaving, he specifically said, "I'll take care of the lawyer's matters. This lawsuit must be won." I nodded in agreement. I trust him. On the day of the trial, I didn't go to the scene, but I saw related reports on the news. I saw Thompson's adopted daughter Sophia kneeling on the ground admitting her mistakes. She was crying very sadly. She begged my parents not to abandon her. However, my parents were completely unmoved. In the end, Mrs. Anderson was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Sophia was sentenced to 2 years for incitement. The judge had just announced the verdict. Daniel suddenly rushed forward, holding a spring knife in his hand. He directly stabbed at Sophia. The tip of the knife struck her heart. Sophia died on the spot. Daniel shouted uncontrollably, "It's all your fault. It's all because of you. I was supposed to be the son-in-law of the Thompson family. It should have been me. The Thompson family's fortune was all mine. The billion-dollar estate would belong to me." Haha. Later I learned, Daniel went out of his way to please Sophia. He even borrowed hundreds of thousands online to buy her a bag. In the end, he not only lost his money, he also lost his life. His only mother still has to serve 3 years in prison. This kind of blow, anyone would break down. However, all of this is his own doing. After reading these reports, someone took the TV remote from my hands, turned off the news, and then held me in their arms. "How does it feel? How does it feel to have succeeded in revenge?" Alexander asked me. I smiled faintly. Those who betrayed me, deserve the punishment they should receive.